Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Becky Megas, she, her pronouns, and I am the founder and chief care connector for Women in Sustainability. And thank you for joining us as part of our Community Voices series. Today, this is an opportunity for our members to present on a topic that is around their expertise. Women in Sustainability, for those who are new to us, is an inclusive social and environmental justice nonprofit that is dedicated to caring for the people that care for the planet through community advocacy, resources, and education to create a sustainable and equitable future through the feminist viewpoint and feminist leadership. Women in Sustainability strives to create a safe space for like-minded and diverse individuals to create purposeful connections and conversations. All are welcome in our community. Ready? Awesome. Well, I am so excited to have this conversation today with Sarita. I'm so glad she is here. She is not only just a dear friend of mine, she is also our DEI board chair for Women in Sustainability. And I've had so many opportunities to have this conversation with her as well, and excited that we can bring this to this space today. So a little bit about Sarita. She has lived experiences growing up in Indian American her lived experiences growing up Indian American guided her passion for social, economic, and environmental justice and the recognition that all is connected. Her commitment to addressing diversity, race, and equity, and belief in the role of regenerative business as the path to uplifting communities and creating change led her towards entrepreneurship. From healthcare to manufacturing and retail, Sarita has 20 years of experience successfully starting and running companies committed to facilitating health, creating impact, providing mentorship, advocating for social, economic, and environmental justice, and building community. So please help me give a warm Women in Sustainability welcome to Sarita.
Hi. So grateful to be here. Thank you, Becky. Before we get started, or as we get started, I just want to recognize that this is a very safe space, and we really want to create a conversation, an interactive conversation with each other. So really feel free to join the conversation, ask the questions, give your thoughts, because this should really be a community space for all of us. And recognizing that, also to know that we all really need to give grace to each other and ourselves as well. I think this is a space that we're all learning and growing, and recognize that we all can make mistakes and learn from each other. So in that space, we all need a lot of grace. And so I think that's how, just put that out there, and not only today, but in our everyday lives too. So as we get started, just to have that knowledge and recognition.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And yeah, it takes conversation after conversation after conversation. I know that we have many of those conversations, and we still learn from each other and those around us. So please, again, feel free to offer yourself grace and ask questions as you need some clarifications on the conversation as well. So I'm going to go ahead and let's start off with our conversation today, talking about going beyond DEI basics. So we kind of talked a little bit more of it being in depth, of it just being more than a checkbox. So what are some of the gaps and disconnects that are happening that within organizations with DEI training that you're seeing?
And I think that's a great question, Becky. And I think we see it so often because I think it's come to that point where DEI has become a buzzword, and all organizations want to say that they are promoting DEI, and that they are, that this is what they do, that they're a very inclusive organization and they have diversity and they're doing all the things. But that what they're really doing is just checking that box. And you can see it if you really look further into what does their C-suite look like? What does their board look like? Is it really diverse? How do they incorporate it authentically into their culture? What are their DEI trainings looking like? So are they what language do they use with their DEI training? There's a lot of organizations that won't let you use certain language when they okay their DEI trainings. They limit the topics that you can use. A lot of them are white run DEI trainings, and it really should not be a white run DEI training. There's no one that has that lived experience. And so when there's people that are doing that, when it's appropriation of another sort, if that's what's happening, because they're just taking that and saying, oh, this is something we can make money off of, but they don't really have the lived experiences, no matter how many certificates and trainings and degrees that they have. There's no lived experience there. So if you're getting a DEI training from someone who's white, you're just not getting, it shouldn't happen. It just shouldn't, because there's no lived experience there. And I think that's also laziness, maybe not laziness, but it's easy and it's comfortable on an organization's part. It's comfortable for the employees, but it's also not stepping outside your comfort zone. You're going within your network already, instead of stepping outside of that network to find people who actually have the lived experience to do the training. And so I think some of those, and then it's just checking the box. Yes, we did it, but how are we authentically incorporating it? Are we recognizing other holidays? Are we giving time off? New York actually just did a great thing. Diwali is the most celebrated holiday in the world by population. And New York City, just as of next year, will start giving kids school holiday for Diwali, which is huge. But, as like, I've always had to just take the day off, or I have to just work or go to school on Diwali, and then celebrate it on another day or in the evening. Or meetings are scheduled on that day, but then, it's Thanksgiving or Christmas travel week the week before, and those meetings are rescheduled, even though you've got such a large population that celebrates Diwali. So if you're authentically incorporating DEI and you've done all the training, then you should recognize that that's also an important holiday that we should be recognizing and incorporating. So that's, I think, where the gaps are falling through and the follow through.
Yeah, I think the same with like Juneteenth, right? We've seen that where people from now, a lot of places recognize Juneteenth as a holiday versus it being just another day. We're starting to see that incorporated into corporate policies. And I think, I've seen so many people who, there's so many different types of holidays that we can incorporate in so many different spaces, it being more of, instead of saying, these are the days that you have off for holidays, leaving a more open door policy of, you get 12 days a year that can be, go towards any holiday of whatever your background is or your religious beliefs. Because it's the same thing with a lot of the Jewish holidays, right? Like, a lot of people have different holidays that are around Christmas and whatnot. So I've seen a lot of that as well.
Where there's so many different options there's so many different ways to make it flexible, right? Like that way where you get to choose how you celebrate your holidays or which days you take. And just recognizing that this is a holiday for somebody. So maybe we don't schedule a meeting this day and we schedule it the next day, like working around those things. I think, especially now, we're looking at a culture where work has become so much more flexible that we can start managing these things and being more recognizing it more.
Yeah. Erica noted that her company does floating holidays, so folks can take whichever holidays are valuable to them, even if they're not federally recognized holidays. And I think a lot of companies are starting to do that. Yeah, that's amazing. So love seeing that there's companies that are thinking of that as well. Talking a little bit about like the DEI training, I know we had recently talked about a training that I took around affinity spaces. I think we hear a lot out there about, don't go ask the person of color these questions because, they're already doing a lot of work and in that space, and we need to learn on our own. And so kind of talk a little bit to that of how to properly handle that space of people who really want to engage in diversity work, but also don't want to burden communities of color, or not just communities of color, people who are of different sexual orientation status, who are different age, all the isms that we talk about. How can we find that balance of learning, but not overwhelming other people with the questions?
Yeah, and I do think it's a balance, right? And even with the disability community, I think that's a big one too. And that's also don't stare at someone in a wheelchair, just go up and ask. Or, you see someone who's disabled, like just ask the question without staring, because you'd rather have it acknowledged. But I think there's that balance of yes, you want to learn and you have to ask the questions. And again, you can't learn without asking the questions. And only the people who've had that lived experience can give you the answers. But there is also a lot of knowledge out there in books, and there's other ways to get some of the knowledge. But I think in some of these instances where we're having trainings and we're doing that type of work, it also comes down to properly compensating someone. Like, I don't, if we're in a social setting and we're friends, like, ask me the questions. I'm more than happy to be engaged in the conversation. But if you want somebody to professionally give you that information, I think then they should also deserve that compensation. And I think that's where some of that, it's easier sometimes, and they deserve that compensation. Like that work shouldn't be given for free all the time. And I recognize, and I think you and I talked about this, where you did some DEI training, where it was a big group, and then the groups were broken up, and then it was broken up into, I think, a white, spaces, right? People of color and white, and then that was facilitated by a white person, and then the people of color, and I agree with that in the sense that it is sometimes more comfortable than to have those deeper conversations, where you can feel a little more comfortable, because even at a party sometimes where I don't know people, all the Asians will kind of gravitate together. You have these common experiences and lived experiences where you feel more comfortable with people who are more of your diaspora. And so I think that is valuable. I think to have those conversations where you can feel more comfortable having people that are more like you, I get, but I think when you have the bigger conversations, you really do have to have them with people who've had the lived experience. And I don't think some of that learning can't be done any other way. And there's that fine balance of, if you're doing the bigger learning, yeah, people should be compensated for that. If you're having a conversation with people and friends, ask me the questions. I know in the disability community, parents are always don't just stare at my kid, ask us the question, ask, be friends, come up, don't pretend they don't exist or just stare, right? You'd rather just get engaged.
Yeah, I wish I had taken a picture of it. I need to go back over. There's a space at the Stanley Marketplace that is for kids with disabilities, and they have handwritten notes on the outside saying, teach your kid not to stare, instead say these things to your kid, or engage them in questions and conversation. And I really appreciated that they're saying, hey, let's have this conversation. We understand that there's a difference, but we need to teach kids to be able to open their eyes, and words matter, right? Words matter, and how you phrase things and how you say things. And I think that that's really important. And I know we had talked about this the other night I follow a gentleman on Facebook who helps educate around the deaf community, and he had brought was bringing to light around around ASL with the Super Bowl. And he talked a lot about they kept it very separate. So if you were somebody who needed those services, you had to go to a special link. The link wasn't easy to find. It wasn't anywhere that was, inclusive or felt like they were part of the Super Bowl. Versus Coldplay has now started doing having interpreters actually part of their dance team. So if you go to a Coldplay concert or see their shows, they actually have incorporated a person on their dance team that is choreographing ASL as they dance. And so it made the person talk about how they felt like they were part of the same experience as everybody else. It wasn't a separate experience. They were there and part of it. And Chris and I started talking about that. And he said, wow, that's a lot of coordination. And I said, I bet you that person who is a dancer doing the ASL interpretation is part of the team who helps to create all of those decisions and create all those coordinations. And that's the difference to it, right? So kind of clarifying what you were talking about there a little bit. Go ahead. Sorry, Sarita.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that's part of that authentically incorporating DEI. It's not separate. And that's where the difference of checking that box versus incorporating it authentically into your communities, right? Like that, it's these differences that are all amongst us. Like if we all come together and actually we form this community where it's just so much a part of us, then those differences actually enhance us in so many ways. And it just becomes this natural learning from each other. And then that question of, well, we don't want to put this pressure on this person or it's too much. Like it just becomes such a natural evolution of learning from each other. And our differences actually make us so much stronger because everybody has such valuable perspectives that we can learn and innovate and just create from. And it doesn't become this question of, well, we don't want to put this pressure on this person and do we ask this question? Don't we ask this question? It just becomes embedded into our natural way of being. When my niece Carola is now 16, and I used to, from the time she was a baby, used to take her to physical therapy appointments with me. For a long time, my specialty was the 0 to 3 population. So she, from the time she was a baby, was around special needs kids. And so it's never been like anything other than this is just a part of my life. And so just now at her 16th birthday party, we have another friend whose daughter is 16 and has significant special needs. She's nonverbal. She's completely dependent for everything. And they were at her 16th birthday party, and Carola just took her stroller and brought her up into her friends and said, hey, everybody, this is Lainey. She's 16, just like us. And, here she is. And I will tell you, Lainey's parents started crying because most 16-year-olds don't do that. Like it was so natural to Carola to just be like, here she is. She's 16 like us. And she brought her into her circle of friends, and Lainey was just part of it. But that's because to Carola, that was just what she's done since she was a baby. And so when you incorporate, it just becomes so natural, and then you don't have to ask the questions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody watch Million Little Things? These your little reaction icons. So I say this because this is interesting. It was actually something similar was on Million Little Things this week, where one of the characters is now in a wheelchair because he had gotten into a car accident, and he's getting back to learn how to date. And he was on a date with a woman who is not in a wheelchair. And he made the comment of, she had talked about in her past experience, her ex was also in a wheelchair. And he's like, oh, so you're just kind of a wheelchair junkie, and kind of made that comment to her. And she said, no, my brother was in a wheelchair. I grew up with it. So I don't see as people being disabled from being in a wheelchair. And it was this eye-opening moment, it was kind of that art meeting culture meeting art kind of moment. Cause you're just like, oh, when people experience it their whole life, they just don't think second nature to it, right? Like it's just incorporating as part of your life and your company and your roles. When we surround ourselves with people with differences, as you were saying, it makes us better people because we don't see those differences. So yeah, talk a little bit about, thinking of all of these different ways that we can incorporate diversity, equity, inclusion. We're talking not just in terms of race, but also in terms of disabilities. And I will note that I am a person technically of disabilities. I'm not physically disabled, but I have a disease that I've had for 38 years. And, it has caused some disabilities within my hands and legs and stuff like that. So I think disabilities sometimes aren't always just seen as well. There are disabilities that are out there that exist, in many different realms, but disabilities, age, race, culture, sexual orientation, thinking through all these different isms that exist, how can we start to make it more of a connection and piece together that disconnect, and creating really authentic practices within our organizations or our own spaces?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think some of that is really, and I'm going to say this too, because I also have a disability, and mine's and I always say mine is invisible until it's visible. And so we've had a lot of these conversations just around disabilities, and even going to spaces where I had to leave because I have epilepsy, and I was like, oh, the lighting here, I can't even stay in this space. And so I think sometimes you and I see where recognize even just how that the spaces and how it's not thought through, all the flashlighting, or I go to concerts and I'll have to keep my head down because I can't handle the strobe lighting and stuff. So I think we have there's so many different things when it comes to inclusivity that is so much beyond just we're talking physical spaces and accessibility and so many different aspects to it. But how do we incorporate it more? And I think some of it, when you talk about spaces like that, even just thinking about how are we making places more accessible to people and without making it obvious, do we pay attention to, is there sign language available? Is there language interpretation available? Is there Spanish? Are we giving people access in Spanish? Are we recognizing what our lighting is looking like? Are we giving people options of somehow quietly stating hey, I need this accommodation, without making it, making them feel like they need having to disclose something that they don't want to disclose? Are we creating those safer spaces for people? And are we doing things that don't look like tokenism? That I think is a huge one. I think when we're doing social media posts, being really careful about that, or corporations and organizations not looking like it's just tokenism. Do we just do a post on during Black History Month? Do we just do a quick post during AAPI month? Do we just do one maybe at the beginning of the month and then forget it for the rest of the month and the rest of the year? I think that happens so much that it's recognized as tokenism. Do we have that one person of color in that picture somewhere? It's so inauthentic, and it's recognized that way. I know a few years ago, Nordstrom's sent out a Happy Diwali email. They'd never done it before, and they haven't done it since, because I think they recognized how poorly it was perceived. And you would think that I got it, and then I was like, this is token. This was just such poor marketing on their part, because they've never done it before. They didn't do it again. And they've never authentically incorporated that into any of their marketing. You don't see an Asian, an Indian person in any of their pictures before that and after that. And I'm like, we're not stupid. We know you're just trying to get our, us to buy, and you recognize Diwali, but you've never you didn't incorporate it into any of your marketing that you've done before or since. Then put some Indian people in some of your ads, right? That kind of stuff. It's recognized all the time. So if you're going to recognize Black History Month and post something, then all through the year post something, or at least make sure that your posts have, Black people in them all year long. And I think that is a big one. And the other big one is sitting down at the table and asking the questions. Not assuming what needs to happen or what supports different communities want, but like actually sitting down at the table and asking like the question, like, what support do you need? What help would you like? Or would you even like our help? Like, I think that's a huge one. I just actually had this conversation this weekend I'm part of a South Asian political, legislative advocacy group. And we were just talking about even how for us, we absolutely support other communities of color legislatively, but we're not going to do anything we'll support, absolutely, give our name, but until they ask us to do something specific, we're not going to make the assumption that we'll just come in and help you with this and this, because everybody has already what they're doing and how they're doing it. And to make that assumption that they need our help, that's, we'll help, obviously, and we'll support, but to never make that assumption and to ask the questions and see where that support is needed and how. Yes. And then absolutely give it, but never make that assumption. And I think that's huge, because I think a lot of people go in and say, oh, well, this community needs this, and we're just going to do this, and go in and we'll sit down at the table and see what is actually wanted and how. And I think there's a lot of cultural differences in that, because every culture has its own way of doing things, and every culture has its own what they need or what's important to them, and the levels of importance for different things. And so what we go in thinking is important might not be what's important to them, priority wise. And I think that's really important to recognize, or how something's done or how things are communicated is also very different for different cultures. And I think recognizing that and seeing, and working within that versus taking the way that you do something and trying to implement that onto the way different communities do things, it's never going to work. And so really just sitting down at the table and having a conversation and talking to people is so important.
Absolutely. Will you kind of clarify tokenism a little bit for those that may be not as familiar with the term?
Yes. So tokenism, it's when you have that one person to say you have a panel and there's a panel discussion on something, and you have that one person, you have maybe 3 white people and then that one person of color. It's the tokenism to say, oh yeah, see, we're promoting diversity and we have the one person here who's diverse. Or you have maybe 3 or 4 white males on a board, and then you have the one woman. Everybody recognizes it as tokenism. It's just this token person on there to try to prove that you're being diverse and inclusive. But it's pretty much recognized as tokenism.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And we are having these same conversations within our circle of women in sustainability, right? How do we ensure that we're walking that talk? So it's making sure that what we say matches with what we do. And I it's really important if you're going to show people of color during 1 month, doing it all month. If you're going to show people with disabilities 1 month, do it all months, and not just doing it within that specific time and space. I want to pause here for a second and ask, does anybody have any questions? We kind of been going through some different concepts. Is there anybody who needs some clarification? Is there anybody who has a question? Just open it up to, what are your thoughts, and where are you seeing maybe some challenges that you're having or some questions that you have within your DEI journey? And feel free, again, you can post those in the chat. You can raise your hand and unmute if you would like to ask the question. We'll give it a second and see if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask in this moment.
I have a question, which is not well thought out, so I apologize if it's kind of jumbled.
Totally fine.
About maybe being a company or an organization in Denver County. I think it's maybe 80% white. I could be wrong on that percentage. But obviously a high number of white folks. And so if you're trying to be more diverse, you maybe only have one or two people that are not white on maybe a board or some other group within the organization because it's such a white city. So how is that just then tokenism or written off as tokenism, or how do you be more diverse in a non-diverse place? Does that make sense, or am I being clear?
No, it does make sense. I think that's where the challenge comes in, to really go outside the comfort zone of who you know and the community that you're in, because I mean, Denver, while it is majority white, there's still a lot of people out there that aren't. And I think that's where that challenge comes in, to say we can reach out to people that we don't outside of our network, because there's a lot of qualified people in this community that are not white, that are available. We just have to try a little harder to reach out and find people. And so it's just a little bit more work, I think. But I think it's possible, especially in Denver, really. So I think if you were maybe Colorado Springs, it might be a little bit more challenging, but Denver, actually, there is the options. And I think it's important because, again, I think that diversity actually enhances the community and the company and the organization, because you just get so many more valuable perspectives. And so even in an 80% white organization, you still have those options of reaching out of that network. And I think that's what ends up happening a lot of times with most places and communities, organizations, is that we end up going to the people we know, right? That's how people get hired for the most part, is you have contacts and this contact gets you the job, and you know this person, and that's who's the next person that gets hired. And so it's just having to try that much harder to go outside of your networks.
Yeah, thank you. Laura, I'm going to go to you and then we'll ask the question in the chat next. Laura, if you want to unmute.
Hi. Thanks. Hi. So I want to circle back to Becky, what you said about A Million Little Things, because I love that show, and I saw that episode too and had a different take on it. So I'm just curious. So when you had said this guy in the wheelchair was out on a date with this woman, and he thought she was like a wheelchair fetishist, and you had said she didn't see his difference. And I took it as she totally saw his difference, but it didn't bother her. And I think there's a really big difference between saying, we're all the same, I don't see your difference, versus seeing the difference, but just having it not be a big deal. So I'm just wondering if I'm not even sure if it's a question, but I felt it was important to say that.
I know, and thank you for saying that. And I acknowledge that I spoke incorrectly there, because you are correct. It was in that she did see the difference and it didn't bother her. And I think that is really important. And I'll pass it to Sarita to maybe comment on that, because I see your head nodding as well.
No, I think you're right. And you just clarified that too. I think that's probably because we've had conversations about this too. And I think you just clarified yourself too. And got what you meant when you said it the first time, because I know I've heard you say it differently before. So yeah, I think we absolutely need to acknowledge the differences, because that's what makes us so much, the uniqueness is actually what brings us together and makes us stronger. So yeah, it's the differences that we need to acknowledge instead of ignoring them. And then from those differences come together.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And that is that part of grace, right? So thank you for acknowledging, and I accept that, misspeaking on my end, and will help to reframe in the future as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So Pam had asked in the chat, do you have advice or resources for finding people outside of the network?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of resources out there. I think if you go to a lot of the universities, will have a lot of different organizations. There's a lot of groups that just out in the community, there's so many groups that, like, there's the South Asian business networking group, there's the the Latino groups, there's just so many different groups that are out there. If you look on between LinkedIn and the universities, and are some good places to find them. And just within again, that's one of those questions you can always ask somebody, right? Like, if you, like, I can give you probably 3 different South Asian groups that would be good networking, where you can, depending on what you're looking for, and how you can reach out to different people. And then if you wanted more further information, or I can connect you to somebody who would have that information. And those are the easy questions to ask somebody if you know of, those are, I guess when we go back to what questions should you be able to ask or feel comfortable asking and not want to, or not ask, I think that's an easy question to ask anybody that's within a certain group, population. Like, if I'm South Asian, I could probably connect you with a bunch of South Asian groups. If someone Latino, they can connect you. If you just go on LinkedIn, you'll find some. If you go into the universities, they always have a bunch of networking groups. So it's, again, it's more challenging, but it's definitely just go outside of your comfort zone a little bit, and you can get the answers.
I appreciate that, Sarita. And I was wondering, can you share what groups you just mentioned just for the South Asian community?
Yeah, there are. So there's, I can, afterwards, we'll send you an email and I'll send you a bunch of links, but there is the Colorado South Asian, yeah, I'll just send you a bunch of links. It's easier.
And if anyone has any favorite job boards too, we've compiled a list of 100 different job boards, and we have search strings on historically Black colleges and universities and things like that, but we've noticed just not a ton of traction on job boards. And so if there's any favorite ones too that people like and have success with, I'd love to hear that too.
Is it a specific area that you're looking for?
No, just in general. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Once we send a follow-up email, I'll send you send you some links to that, as well as there's a really good DEI training that the Food something of New England does every year it's more food related, but it's a really good anti-racism training that's coming up starting in April, that I'll send. And then I have something else. So we'll send you a bunch of resources here.
Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah, we'll send that follow up. So another question in the chat is, wanted to clarify a vocabulary word. Would tokenism also reflect in actions versus people? For instance, a one-time recognition during a Heritage Month and no authentic incorporation the rest of the year. Would it be accurate? Sorry, keep moving. Would it? Computers. Would it be accurate to use the term tokenism in that context, or would it rather be called performative DEI?
I would say it could be either. I would use it as either, because it could also be, I would call it tokenism too, or performative DEI. I think you could use tokenism as actions or with people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Is there any other questions? Anybody, we have a few minutes still, and I've got a few more, but I just want to make sure that we give space to everyone to ask questions. Feel free to pop it in the chat or raise your hand, unmute if you'd like to do so. And as kind of we're going through that, we're waiting for people want to ask additional questions. Kind of why is this valuable? Why is this important to have this conversation? And why is it really important to go past the check marks and really truly create a plan that embeds diversity, equity, inclusion into what you do and the work that you do, and again, your daily lives? Why is this valuable?
I think that's some of the stuff that we've already talked about in a lot of ways. Creating it so that it's embedded within our communities and our daily life, then it just becomes natural, right? Like, then we're not wondering, like, should we ask that question, or how do we incorporate it, or how, because it's not incorporated, then it's just like, we're not wondering how to incorporate it. It just is. And those differences then really just become so much more a part of us that everything is just stronger together, right? Like, we just have more, I think it just makes innovation better, creativity better. All of that just becomes stronger. The way our systems better, because we've also then have all these unique perspectives coming together, and we're not necessarily fighting each other, but people aren't feeling this disconnect or this oppression. And we have so much of that in our society right now, that I think that also impacts, right? Like, we just have how comfortable people are feeling. And if you're got this level of discomfort and oppression, we're just so limited in how we all are engaging with each other, or how comfortable we feel like we're engaging with each other, and how free we feel to really be ourselves and connect. And that's just a disservice, I think, to all of us. And if we can truly, authentically start incorporating this, where you're not feeling like you're on the outside, or you're not having that seat at the table, you're just, that equity piece just comes together more. And then that justice piece comes together more, where people aren't, when you take it on a grander level, you're looking at environment, you're looking at health, you're looking at all the pieces of the puzzle that actually makes a community run. And when you've got people that don't have the healthcare equity, they don't have environmental justice, and living in places that are, polluted, or don't have access to water, and all of these areas of oppression, and how it all just builds on each other, the access to education and everything just, and then it spirals out. So I think the more we can incorporate and the more we can do, the more we can uplift everybody.
Yeah, I love that. And what are some ways that people can continue to get this education? So they leave here today and they are inspired and say, I want to really think about how can I embed these principles into my work? What are some ways that people can continue that journey and that education?
I think one of the biggest things is continuing to have the conversations. And I think that's huge. It's just being open to having the conversations with each other, within communities, and getting involved in different places where you don't feel comfortable, maybe, right? Like, sitting down at the table and having those conversations, getting outside of your comfort zone, engaging in those conversations and places. I think, I mean, there's plenty of books and things out there to read as well, but one of the biggest and impactful ways, I think, is truly sitting down at the table with people and having the conversations and getting outside of your comfort zone and creating those connections. I think you learn so much by just engaging with people and talking to people and learning from different communities. And I think that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the getting out of your comfort zone, right? It's easy to fall into that space, and making sure how you can push your boundaries a little and learn from people that are different. Okay, I'll ask again, any other questions, any other thoughts? We've just a few more minutes. I do have another question, but just want to make the time for anybody who would like to ask anything. And again, chat or unmute. How is everybody feeling? Feel free to post in the chat. Are you feeling like you're ready to learn more? How are you feeling? Everyone's just cold today. Well, as we continue to, kind of wrap up, what do you see as how this combines with sustainability, or how it's connected to sustainability? And what do you kind of see as the future for social and environmental connections?
What do I see as the future? I know you love this question.
It's my favorite. You knew it was coming.
I knew it was coming. I know I should have prepared this question. I think what I love right now is that there is so much openness to all of it, to the learning, to the recognition of the work that needs to be done in sustainability in DEI, and that there is so much work to be done. And I love our younger generation that is just so eager and recognizes how much there is to be done and wants to do the work. And so I think that there is a lot, while it seems like it's very challenging, and it is. And while there's a lot of challenges and the world seems to be falling apart, like it's also very hopeful, I think. And I like that there is that hope there as well. So I guess it's hopeful. But I actually I saw something really quickly in the chat. It went by really quickly, but I think they also need the opportunity is where I was gonna respond to really quickly. And I think, some of that opportunity is sometimes it's just going to the hole in the wall restaurants is a great way, and talking to the restaurant owners. I mean, that's an easy way to get out of your comfort zone and talk to people who are from different cultures, because those little, not the trendy restaurants, but if you go to Aurora and go to some of the tinier, really, truly authentic restaurants, you can go and have truly authentic, really good food and talk to the restaurant owners. That's a way to really get outside of your comfort zone a little bit and start engaging in those conversations. If you go and you look on Eventbrite or Meetup or all those, there's always all communities have celebrations for their holidays. And it's hard because you're going to feel out of place, but you can go and, go to some of those celebrations and start having those conversations and just those experiences. And I think those are some easy ways to just start getting out of your comfort zone a little bit. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of when I was doing physical therapy more actively, was being invited or sitting down with all the families from different cultures and being able to really engage with them and learn about their cultures and eat their food, and then invited to all these weddings from different cultures or celebrations and family events. And I learned so much. So if you can find those little spots, places that you can go, or if you're at work, just in the conference, like, I mean, most people work from home now, but if you're in the office, like just, starting to have those conversations with outside of your little group that maybe you just talk to, or, like somebody's always probably bringing some food in, and just talking over food is always the easiest way to start having a conversation.
Yeah, the most common thing that we all do is we eat. And I'll make a note that Kayla Ferguson is a great place to go. She operates a company or an organization called The Same Plate. And so she actually does these dinners in communities. So she goes out to different restaurants and different cultures. She's done, I think the most recent was Colombian, but she's done a Ethiopian restaurant. She's done some like truly authentic Mexican restaurants, but it is a great way that you can you can get out with community with people and feel a little more safe, but still embrace yourself and engage in different cultures. So The Same Plate is someone who's out there that you can probably also partake in eating out with different communities and different cultures.
It's a great thing to do at work too. If you know of a holiday coming up, like that's or either anything, or it doesn't even have to be a holiday, but maybe do if you're working at an office, but like do a community, like everybody bring food from their community or something, and bring a food. I mean, food is a great unifier. So like Chris said, but and then that's a great way to just incorporate everybody's heritage and like bring people together and make them feel included and start talking to each other about where they come from and who they are. And people love to talk about their food.
Yes, people love to talk about food. And I'm also going to drop in the chat. Inclusive Guide is a good resource as well for if you're looking for places to visit. Inclusive Guide is run by Parker McMullen, and Queen Work is her name on Instagram. If anybody follows her on Instagram, she tends to be known more for her Instagram name. But this is a great guide to check out some restaurants and talk, or restaurants and or businesses who are inclusive. So check that out. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Sarita. Thank you so much for spending the time with us, talking about how we can go deeper into our DEI work. I saw some comments of people who are excited to get this conversation going at work as well as in their communities. So thank you for helping us continue our journey in this space. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Please help me give a round of applause to Sarita. Thank you. Of course, we'll be planting trees in your name to One Tree Planted as a thank you from Women in Sustainability. We have more events coming up. Check us out, womeninsustainability.org. Always love to see everybody, to see their faces. And we look forward to seeing you soon and learning how you are creating a bigger impact. So thank you for all your work too. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Stay warm out there. Stay safe.